Hello, Embers, and welcome to episode 1 of the Ember Exchange. We're so excited that you've decided to join us. I'm Dylan. I have two co-hosts who are sitting next to me. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, I'm Jill. I am the wife of Dylan, one of the three here for the Ember Exchange.
And I am Heidi, the third resident. I don't actually live here, but I do part-time in some capacity. We're happy to be here and excited to see where this takes us.
The Ember Exchange is a place where we like to bring truth and light to some important modern day topics and issues, things that are a part of our everyday lives. And we run into things that we think probably the Embers also tend to encounter. So this is a space for us to engage with some of those topics and try to bring some light to them through the lens of our faith.
Yeah, our thoughts. We like to think that we have some original thought out there, but they are very much based in the Bible. And so that's where the truth and the light are going to come from. At the end of the day, we're going to do our very best to represent the Lord well.
We also hope that you are here to learn and grow with us. That is a part of this.
That's why we call it the Ember Exchange. There's this exchange happening that we hope that you'll participate in. All right, I'm excited to dive right in. We have some very interesting topics for today. The first of which is women in leadership roles.
Yeah, this is a topic that surprisingly comes up pretty regularly in conversation when I'm talking to Jill. And since we are 20-somethings and 30-somethings, we are all in the workforce, and Jill and I are leaders in our workforce, and so we like to talk about how that influences our lives, and then also how we can represent the Lord in our leadership roles and what that even looks like both within the church and in a professional setting.
I'm going to pose a question. I think this would be a space where I am not a woman in leadership. So I would like to hear from each of you. What are some positive things and some challenges that you've experienced and some of your thoughts on that?
I suppose I can start. Like, as a leader in a professional sense, I think that oftentimes we talk a lot about how women don't have opportunities or that pay gap, you could say. And I honestly think that it's the opposite is true. I work in financial planning right now, and there are advisors everywhere who are just grasping at straws to get female advisors. And they will do like almost anything to get a great female advisor in their firm. And that dynamic has been really interesting. Like when you go to conferences and things, they will specifically have seminars for female advisors, which makes sense, but almost every advisory firm is talking at length about how they can attract more women into the financial planning world and retain them as well. There's definitely demand out there, and they are willing to pay an arm and a leg. But I think that sometimes as a leader in a professional world, as a female, it can be difficult to not just turn on your masculine and try to act like a man in that space.
What does that mean?
It means just like generally not showing your emotions and being very by the book. Not that women aren't, but we can be a lot more fluid, generally speaking. And so we have to just act more masculine, quote unquote, in order to blend in with the men who are in the room. And sometimes that can be difficult to do.
I think that the observation that I've made is as a manager of people, my boss is a male. And let's say I am turning on my masculine leadership voice or attitude in a scenario. Even when I do that, I don't think that it is received as well, even from my boss. Luckily, I work in a place where him and I work well together, but sometimes I will say or at least think I'm saying, and I think for the most part am saying the same thing he is saying, and yet it is then received by the team with the result that I was looking to get, but I didn't.
So you're saying that the messenger plays an important role
kind of
in
think
how
it
the
does.
message is delivered.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? Should it be that way? Is that natural? Or is that discrimination?
I don't think that it is discrimination, even though that might be the natural initial leap to go to. I think that it is a natural reaction because women were not intended for leadership.
Interesting. Would you like to elaborate on that? Leadership is a broad term, perhaps.
Yeah.
See, I think I agree with what you're getting at, but I do think that women are supposed to be leaders and have the capability of being leaders. But I think we are supposed to be leaders alongside men, not necessarily over men, if that makes sense. I, Lord willing, if I have children someday, will be the leader of my children, but my husband will be the leader of the household. And I think we have leadership capabilities. But when we move that to a professional setting, I think it's hard to divorce the way the Lord created a family, right, and men and women relationships. It's hard to divorce that when we are like talking about a professional setting. And so I think we are supposed to lead, but I don't think we're supposed to lead without a male figure to be the voice, even though we can have influence on the man.
I wouldn't disagree with that. I think that the distinction I would make is, so you were saying, the way you were saying it was leadership capabilities versus as a mother, Lord willing, you'd be the leader to your children and your husband would be the leader to your household.
Mm-hmm.
So in that scenario, I would say there's one leader in that situation and it's still your husband. And having traits of leadership or authority are something that a mother can have or a female in the workplace. But naturally, the Lord created the man to be the leader. There can be traits of leadership without specifically being the leader.
Can we parse out the difference between authority and authority figure and leadership? Leading is really just influencing and doing the things that you want your people underneath you to do as well. So coming alongside the people that you're leading and leading with empathy and how all of that works much better. It's about influencing people rather than being an authority figure and just telling people what to do. Because I think that men are meant to tell people what to do, whereas women have the ability to influence leadership in the sense that we are much more empathetic and able to bring people in. So that beautiful melody of the male and the female in leadership, I think, is really what the Lord wants for a family and also works well in a professional setting. And it is good to have hierarchy within an organization, right? You don't only want the men at the top and then the women at the bottom. I think there's supposed to be a good blend of men and women in leadership positions. But at the same time, if you have a board of leaders and there's men and women, who's going to likely have more influence there? I think the male will have the final say, but they're influenced by what the women are saying.
And is that correct? Is that how it should be?
I think so, yes. When the Lord created Adam and Eve, he very specifically took the rib out of Adam's side. He didn't take a part of his spine from behind him. He didn't take a part of his head from in front of him. He took from his side. And so I think we are supposed to be linked side by side, walking towards the Lord. I don't think it's supposed to be the man specifically being in front of the woman or the woman being behind the man.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I tend to disagree with that, actually.
Okay.
And
As
the
would I.
reason for that is because if we look at the creation account, that was pre-sin. So woman was created as the perfect helper for man. First off, the notion of a helper is somebody non-essential but useful. And then if you read into the language of after the fall, after Eve and Adam eat of the tree, you find that the woman's desire will always be for her husband.
Can I counter that though?
Sure.
It is not good for man to be alone. I think that in order for there to be goodness, which when God says something is good, that means it's perfect. In order for there to be perfection, the woman had to exist. So I would say she is a very essential part of creation. Even though she was created secondarily, it does not mean that she was not created essentially.
I definitely can get behind what you are describing. I do still think that it is not in a leadership position, though, at least in the perfect world. Not secondary in a sense of non essential or unimportant. God obviously did it with a purpose. But he also, the same verse, it's not good for man to be alone. He did say alone, but he didn't also say needs a co-leader or needs a board of directors, right? Doesn't need to fill out a spot. Like that wasn't the intention, I don't believe.
If I may cut in with so this is Genesis chapter 3, verse 16. This is part of the post-sin, I guess, curse, I would say. There's some prophecy in here, but mostly curse. So he first curses the serpent, then he says to the woman, I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labor, you will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. So there's very much not a sense of side by side in that, which maybe was more towards the intended structure of the world when
The
it was
side by side.
perfect, but due to the fall, that is no longer the case. You also look to illustrations of marriage through the relationship between Christ and the church, right? We wouldn't say that the church is beside Christ. He is the head of the body, just as the husband is the head of the wife. And in that leadership sense, the man is foremost and the woman supports, just as Jesus is foremost. He doesn't need us, the church, but he wants a relationship with us. And so we fill that role of his body. Does that feel weird when I say that?
Doesn't
Do you
feel
disagree?
weird, and I do think that it is a consequence of sin in many ways, that now the man is the head of the household.
I would argue no, in the sense, as Dylan was saying, that the idea is we are an image or a reflection of Christ and the church. We are asked to follow the shepherd, who's the leader. We are asked to become Christ-like, but we're never asked to become the shepherd.
Yes, I agree with that. Even though there are consequences for sin, the Lord still gives us a construct or a blueprint for how to live in this world of sin. So in some ways, yes, this is a curse, but also in some ways it's the Lord saying, now that there is sin, this is how you will operate in this world.
In some sense, going all the way back, is it discrimination or is it natural? The world we live in is a natural result of sin. That is the world we live in. That is nature
Yeah.
at this point, right? We can point back to pre-fall, but that's not the life that we live in. So in a sense, we do live under that curse, saying that the man should rule over, in which case that is maybe why people react differently or feel differently about female leaders. Is because naturally we live in a world of sin, and that means we live under the consequences of the curse and the fall. And so that is natural.
It's so hard because it is natural. You can see the feminist movement. The natural inclination for a sinful world is for women to want to be the leaders, even though we see biblically that the Lord intended for the male to be the leader. So the Bible is the opposite of the world. When the world pushes for feminism, the Bible is telling us, no, the masculine and the feminine are good and to be desired, and we need masculinity and we need femininity, and we need them to coexist well together, like he intended in a household.
Would you say that her desire will be for her husband in a way? I think that to me, that illustrates the feminist movement. Her desire will be for her husband. She desires to be in that role, and yet he will rule over her. So that striving for that power, I think, comes out in the feminist movement.
Yeah. that while women are trying to take over the leadership role, the feminist movement is, I don't need a man.
Right. When the curse says that her desire will be for her husband, that's a curse, right? This is a bad thing. So the woman is desiring the role of the husband.
Correct. They want that position, but in a perfect world, that's not actually what their position should be.
I also just want to go back, and I really don't want it to be misconstrued that, like, we don't think women are secondary, correct?
In what sense?
Like, just because they were created second, we do not think that they are secondary in worth or value, or that their word should not be taken seriously because they're females.
They are equivalent in the eyes of God. They are equivalently eligible for salvation and redemption and eternal life.
And they are equivalent in the eyes of the Lord and in our eyes, right?
I think that men and women are different.
Different but equal.
Equal is an interesting word because you wouldn't say an apple and an orange are equal. You would say they're both fruit, but to compare them would literally be comparing apples and oranges. So it's hard to say that two things are equal. In other sense, two things are equivalent when they are most certainly not.
So different but of equal value.
Certainly,
Okay.
each individual is of equal value to God.
Yes. Because I guess if you're saying that equality is the same thing as being the same, then that goes against the fact that we just said they were different.
Certainly.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. So they are
Absolutely.
inherently different. They are apples and oranges, but they are of equal value to us as Christians, especially for us as Christians. We really value women and children. So I just don't want that to get misconstrued because we are not saying that women are any less than men in any way. But there is a way that the Lord has created male and females to coexist within a family, and much of that bleeds into the way that we coexist in leadership roles professionally. Would you agree?
Can I say something edgy? I think that women are lesser as being leaders to the same extent that I think men are lesser at being child bearers and rearers.
I tend to agree with that. It comes out culturally that, oh, the jokes about, I left the kids with dad this weekend, who knows, they're just going to eat pizza and laundry's not going to get done. But naturally, we were created to carry children and care for them in their lives in a way that a father can't. There are things that a father can provide that a mother cannot. That is why marriage is a reflection of the perfect marriage of Christ and the church. But there are obviously flaws to our version of that because it is full of sin.
I have a couple thoughts.
Yeah.
The first is that in this culture, we could do a better job of seeing the role as a woman in the household and the role as of a man in the workforce as equal and not one lesser than the other.
Both very critically important for the
Yes.
functioning of a society.
Just
Yes.
because one brings in physical dollars, right? So there is an inherent worth on work outside of a household, and one does not bring in physical dollars does not negate the value of the woman in the household.
And the next generation is only possible because of mothers.
Yeah.
So men can go out and make millions of dollars, and then if they don't have women, they'll all be dead.
And that's the end.
And that's
that's
the
the
end.
end.
So it's absolutely critical,
Yes.
the role of mothers. And the fact that we've devalued that is criminal in our society.
Womanhood is more than motherhood as well. We, as women, our inherent nature is to mother, but it might not look like children. It might look like volunteering or being a part of a church or even being in the workforce and taking good care and stewarding her employees. Like, I think that motherhood and that feminine nature that we have can spill over to any way that we decide to serve the Lord. Now, do I think that is a huge blessing from the Lord and what He desires for many of us and what many women inherently desire? Yes. But it's not the only way that a woman can be a woman.
Do you think it's the predominant way?
I think it is the natural instinct for many, but not for all. And I think that we see that because there are lots of women who desire to be married but are not yet married. And so what are they supposed to do? Your womanhood is not dependent on your motherhood. Back to, I think, what Dylan had said before, something about, if I heard you correctly, that women have the ability to have children, right? And to bear children, and men do not. So you're saying that
Yes.
men inherently have the ability to be leaders, and that's their role, and so women do not. Is that what I was hearing?
Yes.
Okay, I would counter that and say, while men do not have the ability to bear children, they have the responsibility to be actively involved in their children's lives. He cannot bear the child, but once that child is in existence in the womb or outside of the womb, he bears responsibility.
Yes.
In-
His responsibility is different than that of the mother, though.
It is, but it's an integral part of that family, right?
Oh, certainly.
And in the same way, while the man might have the inherent ability to be leader, it doesn't mean that he can't come alongside, and that women do not have a responsibility to come alongside men, whether that be in the household or in the professional sense. So I think that if we expect there to be a panel of only male leaders, that's equivalent to saying that we are only seeing mothers as the sole providers for children. And while men can have the responsibility of leadership and that inherent ability, like women have the inherent ability to bear children, we need both in order to make the machine work in both spaces.
Obviously, we live in a sensual world, so this doesn't work out exactly how God intended it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I would disagree with that
Okay.
because, yes, men do 100% have the responsibility to be an active participant in their family's life, whether that is with or without children.
Mm-hmm.
But that responsibility is, he is called to be the leader. He is called to be the provider. And by him doing those things, that is how he is that active participant. And that mother is an active participant by bearing those children and then caring for them in their lives. And in a perfect world, there wouldn't be a feminist movement. There wouldn't be a call for boards of people to have equal number of men and women on them, because mothers would be at home with their children, caring for their children in that sense, while the father is at work providing for his family in a monetary sense, and then also being able to come home and be the leader in the family in the sense of a spiritual head of his household. And that is how he is providing and leading his family. It's equally important that your children are fed physically, say, by the mother during the day, and then spiritually fed by the spiritual leader in their household.
I'm going to make one more comment based on Genesis, and then I'm going to have Heidi wrap up the topic.
Okay.
If we extend beyond verse 16, which we had read, which is the curse for woman, to what the curse for man is, to Adam he said, because you listened to your wife and ate fruit from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. And this is the important part, I think. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken, and for dust you are, and to dust you will return. If we look at the split here in what is defined as the curse for the woman, a curse would be taking what you're supposed to do or designed to do and making it hard. So for the woman, now childbearing is painful. That was her role, and now it's hard. She's also intended to potentially co-serve the Lord together and be in communion with God with her husband, but now she is ruled over. On the flip side, the man is eating by the sweat of his brow. And when we tell women that they should be in the workplace, we're double cursing them in a sense, right? The curse for a woman was not to work and eat by the sweat of her brow. That was the curse for man. And so a woman, a mom who's working, she is now experiencing the pain in childbirth, which is the curse associated with being a woman. And she's taking on voluntarily the curse that is given to man, which is working by the sweat of her brow, which, I don't know, I advocate for not double cursing women That would be my position.
I'm actually really glad you said that because I have told Jill, I'm like, I feel like I'm living in the wrong curse. Like I'm bearing a burden that wasn't meant for me.
Absolutely.
Like for sure.
Yeah.
So I definitely understand that like at the end of the day, the leadership role in a professional sense, I do think that the final say should be had by the men, but I don't think that we should negate the influence of women in the professional setting.
Sure.
And we have seen happiness rates of women decrease significantly since we have added a necessary second income into the household. So in some ways, I understand that. I think we are just so far from that in our society that it's difficult to imagine. Like, it's difficult for me to imagine.
Okay. I think that you raise a good point, though. This is some very nice philosophical conversation and thinking about the perfect world and what would happen. But we don't live in a perfect world. We live in our modern culture. And modern culture means that you both have jobs. And you're also dealing with the struggles of leadership in the workplace. Mm-hmm. So what is the takeaway or the conclusion? Maybe I'll start and then I'll let you guys finish because you guys are the ones who actually live with being women in the workplace.
Yes.
My conclusion would be this. I think that if I were to work under a woman, that would feel unnatural. So as a man, if you are in that situation, yes. Is it not ideal? Sure. Is it Christ-like to not then work well? No. Because first of all, you are working for God, not for men or women. And so if your boss happens to be a woman, you don't get to just say, oh, I'm working for a woman, so I'm not going to give my best here. I'm not going to be a contributing member of this team because that isn't giving your best for God. On the flip side, if you are a woman in leadership and you have somebody who has trouble with that, or like you were saying, Jill, it seems to you like you're saying the same exact thing in the exact same way and it's received better from your male colleague than it is from you. Yeah, that sucks, but don't be surprised. Understand that's a natural part of living in a fallen world that's designed to work in a different way than it does.
I would agree.
Yeah.
It's still frustrating. It doesn't make it not frustrating. It makes it make sense. It shines light on it. There's a truth to it, and that's what it is. It also does potentially point towards the fact that because we live in a fallen world and that can be the natural reaction or might be the natural reaction for people even when they don't realize why that might be, that having a set of leaders, if there are women and men in that group, then in a sense they can work together to resolve those things. If certain messages are received from a male leader better than a female leader, instead of being annoyed or frustrated by that, understand it and then learn from it and utilize those around you that are in that position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I've seen a lot on social media about how you can operate your household as if it's a business and do workflows within your home and make it more efficient and happier and all of those things. But I think we miss the opposite, especially as Christians, the way a household operates according to the Lord and bringing that into our businesses. I think that there are some really interesting things that we could bring into an organization that might help with those dynamics and have the women feel loved and respected and the men feel ultimately honored and respected. That could help the people in leadership within an organization.
Yes, the flow should certainly be in the other direction.
Yeah.
The flow comes from God to the family, and then that permeates the rest of our lives, not the other way around.
Yeah. And so to wrap things up a little bit, we believe that men and women are very different, but we are equally valued, and we have responsibilities that are different but of equal value. And so we can operate within our workforces with that understanding that there's a natural inclination for men to lead and for their word to be well received. And there is a natural inclination for women to support and honor men the way that the Lord has intended things to be. And we can respect that and go about our daily lives as women in the workforce, understanding those dynamics and honoring them in some ways, even when it is a little bit frustrating.
So this is an intermediate segment, which we don't have a name for yet, but the premise is that I enjoy whiskey. Heidi and Jill don't particularly enjoy whiskey, or they wouldn't necessarily choose it out of a list of options.
Right.
Yeah.
This segment is an opportunity for me to bring something new to the table that I've not necessarily had before, or maybe I have, and taste through it with two people who don't have a developed palate. I also don't have a really developed palate. This is a newish sort of experience for me as well. About a year ago, I would have said brown liquor tastes gross. But I've been working very hard to develop that palate and enjoy it. And at this point, I do enjoy it. I've learned to like it, which is a subset of an entirely additional conversation on acquired tastes, which I think we will have a segment about at some point. But for now, we're going to go ahead and just taste some bourbon. So today I have for us the New Richmond Rye. It is their limited release cask strength. It is a straight rye whiskey. You guys are familiar with how
many
proof
words
works?
I didn't know.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's break it
Speaking
down.
of
So rye is not even a bourbon. So I was mistaken already in what I said at the beginning. This is not a bourbon. It's a rye. Bourbon has to be 51% corn in its mash bill. A rye has to be 51% or more rye in its mash bill. I'm not certain what the rest of the mash bill is on this one. Anyway, it is 120 proof or 60% alcohol by volume, and that is because it is cask strength. Typically with a cask strength, you're going to have a harsher flavor because it's higher proof, but you also get more intense flavors in the underlying stuff that you're trying to taste. That would be why my predisposition is towards cask strength, although there's a lot of options out there that are not cask strength. I'm going to crack this open, and as we're tasting, I will read on what the flavors and scents that we're supposed to get are for it.
Okay. It's got like a cool leather label around the neck
It does.
of the bottle.
Yes, stamped 2015. A note about whiskey. Unlike wine, it does not age in the bottle. So if you buy a bottle of wine and you keep it for 20 years, in theory, if you store it right, the wine will get better as it gets older in the bottle. That's not the case with whiskey. Once you bottle it, that's what you get. And actually, there's a point at which it starts to fall off. In theory, once it's sealed and no oxygen is getting in, then it's pretty much not changing from the point it's in the bottle. Once you open it, however, there's some oxidization that happens, and so the flavor of a bottle can change as you drink your way through it. Just some whiskey facts for you. All right, I'm going to pour some of this. Yeah, it's a nice sound. A little bit for you. Yeah.
Alrighty.
There you go. And some for you and some for me. The whiskey stones.
Yes.
So the whiskey stones are intended to cool the beverage without diluting it. An ice cube adds water, which sometimes can be valuable. And actually for these, I should have a little dropper of water here to add, since it is cask strength. If you don't like it at cask strength, you can dilute it down a little bit with a bit of water. So the first thing that we should do is smell it. As one of my friends would say, you have to say hello to it.
Yes.
This individual, in this one review that I found, again, we're doing this because I'm not an expert at this. I can't pick out all the flavors myself, so we're going to rely on somebody else. This person says that you should smell mint, vanilla bean ice cream, and cedar.
I get all of that. The vanilla bean ice cream. I do a lot of smelling of things that are dairy because I can't eat them, so I smell them, and that's exactly what this smells like.
Really? That's interesting because that one's the harder. I'm getting mint, which is
mint.
surprising.
The mint I get too.
That's so cool that you get mint, vanilla bean ice cream, and cedar on the nose.
See, the thing, I couldn't say those things,
Right,
but once you said it, I'm like,
Same.
The mint and cedar. The vanilla bean ice cream.
Yeah, I'm struggling on that.
The vanilla.
Maybe in the mouth it'll be that way. Okay.
Okay.
You can give it a swirl. You see its legs. That's how sticky it is to the glass. And then you can give it a
Very
sip.
sticky.
Oh, okay. So if you can see where the swirl was.
Contrary to what you guys are doing, I think this is excellent. On the mouth,
I'm gonna drink my water.
It's so.
It's so bad. I don't know. I'm just gonna say bad.
It smells.
acquired
so much
tastes,
better.
everyone. Give it a few episodes, and you guys will be enjoying this right along with me.
Right,
I don't know.
You get that really burny feeling.
Would you say it's hot and spicy?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the first listing here on the mouth is hot and spicy. If you can get past the hot and spicy, you will taste mint, vanilla, cedar, and cinnamon.
Didn't
Cinnamon,
taste
just
any-
all cinnamon, cinnamon and alcohol.
like the red hot.
It was like it's like liquidized red hot in a bottle of rubbing alcohol.
Oh my word. It's really bad actually.
Bad.
Okay,
Glad
but
I didn't waste a bunch on you guys. Jeez.
but to be fair, I think that if you're really into this, it could be good. If you're used to that burny
Right. It's an acquired taste.
and
That
acquired
was-
taste.
Yeah.
I
Not great.
I didn't drink
Give
a
it-
lot of it.
Give it
I
one more
barely
sip.
drank any of it.
Okay, should we take
Just give it one
Okay.
more sip.
Wait,
Cheers.
how much are you drinking?
not much.
Oh, okay.
Just like a little.
Just a little taste. I would say that on the mouth, I definitely am getting that vanilla bean ice cream more strongly than I did on the nose. And then, so the finish is how, once you swallow it, the burn goes away. The finish should
Still
be
burning.
long and warm with notes of mint, cinnamon, and cedar.
Okay, the long and the warm. I'm feeling that.
That's all I got is long and warm, and my lips are still burning.
Okay, but you know how mint has that like cooling sensation? I feel that. Yeah. I feel that like on my tongue. It's like cooling and tingly.
Yeah. Should we give this a review?
Yeah.
Are you going to be over there, Jill?
That was just really more for exaggeration, but yeah, I'm gonna be
I don't think it was bad. I just think I haven't drank dark liquor in a really long time.
no bad. I'm gonna be
Not,
honest.
though. It's very good.
Bad.
I get it.
You get it.
I could get it.
Heidi's going to come on this journey with me.
Heidi,
If
is it a vibe?
it's totally completely the vibe. Absolutely. I just need to acquire the taste.
That's fair. Also, this maybe isn't the best first whiskey. If you're trying to convince your friends to drink whiskey with you, don't choose this one.
I'm thinking a little more closer to Jack Daniels.
Oh, no, goodness, no.
I can't
Maybe
say,
a gentleman Jack, but you want to get good stuff if you're starting somebody off. You don't
I
want something
can't
that's
say I
super
enjoyed
burny.
that.
I think it was very much an experience.
Okay.
It was something.
Sometimes and memorable experiences are not always enjoyable per se.
I can
But-
think of a lot of memorable experiences in which I do think I enjoyed them. That was not.
Well, thank
one
you
of
for
them.
joining me on this. I would say, since
It's really
since
not.
you guys think that it sucks, I will be the one to give it a review.
Can
Which
help.
also isn't a hugely, I'm not a broadly tasted individual. I haven't tried every whiskey. Of the ryes I've had, I'd put it at a 6 or a 7 out of 10. I think it's quite good. It's complex. It's got a depth of flavor. The mint is unique. And I appreciated the vanilla bean ice cream in the mouth. It's a good late fall, early winter sipper.
Okay, you know
That
how
would
they
be-
make those? What are they? Hot toddies?
That is a drink, yes.
Yeah, this would be great in some water with lemon, like hot water with lemon. I wouldn't drink it straight. Maybe that's my issue.
My review about the hot tamale drink.
Hot
With-
toddy.
No, hot tamales, the candy.
Oh, got it.
The melted down hot tamales in rubbing alcohol is that it is a -3.
Please, this is not Fireball.
Okay, this is better than. Okay,
Is it though?
I don't know.
I don't think
This
so.
is more complex than Fireball for certain.
Yeah. But I would have been
Fireball is literally melted hot tamales in rubbing.
But I would have been
So
happier.
bad.
But I would have been happier just for it being reasonable for me to just drink all of this and get it down and get it rid of. Instead, I'm expected to sit here and
enjoy it.
Sip it. Okay, maybe I just don't want to drink my bourbons, whiskeys, and ryes neat. Like maybe I would enjoy it with an ice cube.
Potentially. Next go around, I will give you an ice cube.
I think it will a lot.
Anyway, if you'd like to taste along with us, that is, again, the new Richmond Rye, limited release cask strength. Thanks for joining.
Cheers, everybody.
right, welcome to part 2 of the podcast. So, our topic is the mass shooting that took place in Maine, Lewiston, Maine. There was a individual who ended up killing 18 people and injuring a number more. The suspect, who will remain unnamed, because I believe strongly that we shouldn't bring attention to these people. They are sometimes doing this for attention, and I don't want to be the one to give that to them. He was also then, a few days later, found dead from a presumably self-inflicted gunshot wound by police. First off, very tragic. Anytime that this happens, this is a tragedy. Loss of life is always sad. I should say loss of life is always sad when their eternity is not secure. Always bring a little bit of light into this. Yes, it's sad if a believer dies, but we know where they're going. Mm-hmm. It's tragic when someone who has not yet treasured Jesus dies. So that always weighs heavy on our hearts. Mm-hmm. In the wake of this, of course, every time something like this happens, there's a wave of calls for banning weapons, and in this particular case, quote unquote, assault weapons, because in this case, the suspect used an AR-15 styled rifle to commit this atrocity. That's the basic facts as I understand them. I'd be interested to hear what other sorts of things you guys have picked up in the past week or so related to this that contribute to this overall narrative.
Yeah, a few things that I read about included potential warning signs. I don't know all of the validity behind all of them, but there seem to have been some comments made in different news outlets that he was previously a part of our military, and different gentlemen that were in the military with him were giving warnings to police, FBI, others that may have had the ability to prevent some of the tragedy. I believe one of them was also his ex-wife, and also there was discussion on him previously being in a psychiatric ward, being released but still monitored, and some of that monitoring included information about him talking about hearing voices or hearing people telling him things.
I think he said he blamed his new hearing aids for the voices that he was hearing, or something like that.
He was hearing things. Those would be the additional details I think I read about across a few different outlets.
Yeah, that's about all that I know. I just know it can be frustrating when we know hindsight that there were potentially some red flags there.
Interesting, you should use terminology like red flags, because one of the things that often crops up in the wake of something like this is a call for red flag laws. This idea that if there are quote unquote warning signs that somebody could potentially be a threat in this capacity, that those around this person or familiar with this person could report that to law enforcement, and the person could be detained or have their firearms confiscated or some such occurrence, which did not occur in this case. Though from what I understand, there is a similar story recently where something like that did happen.
Yeah, from what I see, there's a student at Cornell University who was accused of posting online threats to kill members of the Jewish community at Cornell, and he actually appeared in federal court and was ordered to remain behind bars for the time being. And so he is now in a place where he cannot create mass chaos and take lives. And I think that is in some ways wise, and in other ways has the potential to cause more harm than good when we impede on people's First Amendment rights.
Yeah. It's interesting that oftentimes when we get into conversations about Second Amendment rights, we very quickly also veer into discussions of First Amendment rights. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of that has to do with this idea that whether or not you are armed can and should be dependent on what sorts of views you voice. So red flag laws are a piece of that. I think they're actually called yellow flag laws in Maine, so Maine has these. They're called yellow flag laws. And Jill, you had mentioned that he had spent time in a mental institution, which this is a particularly interesting case where a number of circumstances should have triggered the in-place yellow flag laws already. So the fact that he spent 2 weeks in a mental institution should have triggered that, and he should have been separated from his weapons according to Maine law, but he wasn't, which adds to the question of, okay, great, so if we pass all of these and then they're not enforced in the cases where they should be, is that even
Why are they
worthwhile?
there?
Why are they there?
Right.
But going back to Heidi's comment on the First Amendment questions, yes, we would tend to agree that saying, I'm going to go shoot up a school, that's a bad idea. You shouldn't do that.
You shouldn't shoot up the school. You shouldn't say it.
Both. I would argue that you shouldn't do neither of those
Neither.
things. Neither
Yeah.
of those things. And that would be a case where we would say, yeah, that seems like somebody who shouldn't have weapons. The challenge becomes in defining, as you said, according to First Amendment rights, what constitutes being worthy of separated from your weapons. And not only what constitutes it, but who decides what constitutes it. So somebody is imposing this on you and on me, and they might have a very different idea of what constitutes justifiable cause to remove your weapons. We know who sets the rules and who makes the decisions, right?
Correct.
It's the governmental, it's law enforcement and governmental authority at some level, whether that be community, state, or federal.
But are they biased?
Are they biased? Do you think they might be biased, Heidi?
Yeah. I do.
But even, but
Yes,
even
of
being,
course they're
but even
biased.
not biased, like in this case where you're saying that Maine did have these laws in place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but whose fault is it that the yellow flags weren't enough? It's obviously the law.
The law enforcement didn't take any action. Nobody took action on the yellow flag laws.
Yeah.
Outside of that, yeah, it's not a fair and just way to say that those laws are in place either, because then who gets to make those calls? Can my neighbor just walk down the street and say, that guy looked at me funny yesterday, or that dude on the road cut me off and he's got a gun hanging in the back of his truck and a big American flag bumper sticker.
Or your liberal sister-in-law doesn't like you and says
and I'm gonna call.
says
So
he's
now
been
I'm gonna
hearing
call
voices.
the cops and give them a license plate, and they can look everything up. And
I think red flag laws typically require that the witnesses be in closer proximity than somebody who cut you off on the street. But there are certainly friends, quote unquote, neighbors or familial relations who would be more than happy to turn in their gun-loving, Trump-loving, Bible-thumping relatives
yeah,
and have their guns taken away. And
I
that's
mean,
scary.
yeah, and I don't know, even if it doesn't have to. In this scenario, the outlets that they're talking about weren't just family. In fact, not family. It was ex-wife and essentially, if you're in the Army, let's call them colleagues. So in that case, it could be colleagues, people that you work with every day. And there are many views in most offices, and they're not always agreeing ones.
Yeah, you've had some experience with some colleagues who I'm sure would have been more than happy to take your guns away.
Yeah, more than happy. Then it becomes this gray area of who gets to make that decision.
We've established the government gets to
Yes.
make the decision.
But there's a decision then bias.
Really, who's making the decision? Sure, it's the government, but who's ultimately more in control of who actually ends up being punished by these red flag laws would be the
Right.
people who are reporting the person.
Yeah.
They're more in
Sure.
control of the situation.
To an extent, if the red flag law did not exist, then they wouldn't have the ability to report somebody on that.
Yeah.
So maybe let me flip the question, though, and say, so there aren't red flag laws, and this sort of thing happens. Is that an acceptable risk?
It is really difficult for me to say yes, it is, because I really do think that it is wise if someone truly, assuming truth here, was in a mental institution, is hearing voices, and has made threats. It is really hard for me to say yes, it's an acceptable risk, because I think of the number of lives that could potentially be saved by putting away people who literally say, I'm going to shoot up a school, or I'm going to cause harm to individuals. If we take them for their word, then I think that they should be put away before those lives are lost and not after those lives are lost.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that?
Yes, you can.
Is there another way to save those potential lives rather than take someone else's rights away?
What's an alternative to red flag laws?
I think the alternative is more people carry guns. Because in this case, if one of these 18 individuals who died had been carrying a gun, the shooter stops with them,
Yeah.
potentially, right? And if
Right.
all 18 of them are carrying guns,
Like if every business owner
yeah,
had a gun.
every teacher in every classroom.
But yeah, because you're saying right there is a potential that let's not even use this scenario, right? If there's a red flag, how can we prevent the shooting from happening? We have probably two options. We take the rights away from someone, and that being First Amendment rights and Second Amendment rights.
Really both.
Someone
yeah.
can, we have the freedom of speech. We live in a country where we have freedom of speech.
Yeah.
So they can say
Horrible
stupid,
things.
horrible things. And that is what it is. They're stupid, horrible things. But they are stupid, horrible people are allowed to say stupid, horrible things. They are allowed to do that.
Because I want to be free to say what I want
yeah.
without someone else telling me I can't say it because they think it's stupid and horrible.
But then also, we have the right to bear arms. If we're going to, without stopping people from getting those two things, is there a way then to hopefully prevent that potential tragedy as well?
I understand all of that, and I think that is a better alternative. But the way that things are right now, not everyone has a gun. And I will say, I do believe that a gun doesn't shoot itself.
It's a tool.
It is simply a tool. And so good people having guns is great. Bad people having guns is not great. And so that's where I think if we know someone's a bad person, then they shouldn't have a gun. Because they are the ones who are going to pull the trigger to harm people. They are not the ones who are going to pull the trigger to save people.
And then counter to that, going along the same theme, essentially, right? Where we are then taking the right away from who's deciding who the bad people are. So we're taking that right away versus the fact that if you make all guns illegal, do you think that all bad people are going to get rid of their guns?
No, and bad people are going to do bad things. So you're going to
They're already
only end up with the
doing-
criminals having the guns.
Actually, you already have bad people that have guns and they're going to do bad things with them. And if you say now no one can have guns, now the good people that are law-abiding citizens that go and fill their paperwork out and buy them from the right avenues and get their guns
A
legal.
law-abiding citizen isn't going to do something bad with it.
But if you make if you make it illegal for everyone, now the law-abiding citizen who wasn't going to do something bad with their gun also now can't get one unless they break the law.
So I completely agree with your point. What I'm saying is that I totally understand where people are coming from when they are pro red flag laws. Because truly, we should be able to see these red flags. Give me a break. Siri knows everything that you're talking about. We can track everything at all times. I don't think that should be difficult. What does become difficult is the fact that we live in a sinful world and that people are going to take advantage of that red flag law and that there is potential for good people to be hurt by a law that's trying to prevent bad things from happening. And so then we have to look to the alternatives, which is having the good people have the weapons to stop the bad thing from happening instead of putting it in the hands of law enforcement or essentially our government. Now, can I go back to what you said? You don't think people should have to fill out paperwork?
Absolutely not. It's an unofficial registry.
Really?
Yeah.
I think it should be way more difficult for all people across the board to get
No,
guns.
I think you should be able to buy your guns from your drugstore.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't understand what's the drawback of having good people, law-abiding citizens,
It goes back.
fill out paperwork, and then also bad people having to fill out paperwork.
Because the bad people don't
Bad
fill
people
out
aren't
the
going to fill the
paperwork.
paperwork out anyway.
And by filling out the paperwork, now the people who want to take my guns away have a record that I bought one. And I would way rather them not.
Because we went back earlier and we said, hey, do you think there might be a bias?
Yeah.
And if that bias decides
Oh my gosh.
that they're going to take everyone's guns away soon, like I said, they're going to just take them all away. The bad guys that got their guns the bad way to do bad things with them, there's no record of them. There's not going to be whether the laws exist there or not.
So you're just making it more difficult for law-abiding citizens to get guns.
Yes.
Correct.
So you're saying there should be no ifs, ands, or buts. It's like getting alcohol. Turn 18, you can buy a gun.
Yes.
Or 21 or whatever you want it to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's wild.
And it always goes back to, you mentioned in a perfect world, people wouldn't abuse the red flag laws. In a perfect world, we wouldn't need red flag laws because there wouldn't be bad guys with guns. So in no circumstance is a red flag law a good idea, because in a perfect world, you don't need it. In a fallen world, it cripples the good guys far more than it does the bad guys.
But how often are good guys being stopped from getting guns?
Currently, as long as you fill out your appropriate ATF paperwork, you can get a gun. In the current circumstance, aside from some obnoxious rules about bump stocks or fully automatic weapons or silencers or NFA items, etc., I can go and buy a handgun, and it takes a couple of minutes because I'm a law-abiding citizen and I can go do that.
Right.
Great.
So
The problem is that's not what's being advocated for. Everything in the wake of this shooting is, we want to take away your assault weapons, whatever that means.
All of them.
And so then now you can't buy them anymore. And if you have them, because I had to fill out that form when I went to buy mine, now they have a record that I bought it. And so they know where to come looking for it.
in what situation do you need an AR-15? Why would anyone need one besides to hurt another individual?
That is exactly why I have it.
To hurt the bad guys.
Yes.
But
Because what are
how
you
do
gonna-
I know that you're a good guy or a bad guy?
You
I don't know that.
You don't. So
Right.
you need one, because you don't know who the good guys and bad guys are.
Is everyone a good guy in the world right now? I can go get a firearm. Bad guys can go get a firearm. They could do it a legal way or they could do it an illegal way. However they do it. They have guns. We've seen them in action. We have seen bad guys with guns in action.
Yeah.
And we don't live in a perfect world. So now what? Now we have to protect ourselves. If the gentleman that shows up here with his firearm starts shooting away like he shot away at those innocent people, yeah, I want an AR-15 so I can shoot back and stop that from happening.
The heck out of him.
So I will read, the Second Amendment says this: a well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I am the militia. You are the militia. We are, and regulated, so people will read that and say regulated, that means rules. In the time of writing, regulated meant well-trained. Not only should I have a firearm, I should know how to use it. Necessary to the security of a free state, that is, if I am no longer free, it is my responsibility to make sure I stay free. And as such, I should bear arms, and that shall not be infringed.
I understand fully that I am making compassion arguments and that they're really weak. You guys are speaking the truth, and it is a truth, and I am pro-gun, and I think that it is good for good people to have guns.
And it really is from a point of compassion, right?
It's from a point of
because
compassion.
and I would say that it's an interesting, it's hard, right? Because we do live in a sinful world. We live in a fallen world where there are bad guys.
I know.
And so it's easy to look and say, okay, I, having an understanding of what good and evil is, because I am in line with the definition of good and evil as according to God, who defines what good and evil is. Mm-hmm. I can look at somebody and say, that's an evil dude. He shouldn't have a gun.
He shouldn't.
And that's probably true.
I know.
The issue is that we don't live in a country or in a world where the people who make the rules are aligned with your understanding of good and evil. If we lived in a theocracy, first off, we wouldn't need red flag law. But since we don't, we shouldn't have them, because that's handcuffing you in your ability to protect yourself. Not just from the guy down the street who's a mass shooter and he's going to shoot up his neighborhood and the school, but from said government who would like nothing more than for you to be subservient
To them.
to them. And that is literally your one way to say no.
Yes.
They show up.
You're right.
They show up to your door with guns, and you don't have guns. What are you gonna do?
Put my hands up and walk out.
Or die. Like those are your options.
Those are your two options, right?
Second Amendment gives you a third, because it gives you the right to free speech.
Because
also.
now it also gives you the right to.
We use the Second Amendment to defend the first.
Yeah. It's just really hard to understand that there are bad people out there, right, who are going to shoot people up. And it's obvious to me that those people shouldn't have the weapon to create mass murder. What is harder for me to grasp is that the reason that the red flag laws should not be in place, and I agree with this, that they should not be in place, but it's hard for me to grasp that the reason that that is true is because there are hateful people out there who are going to just try to use that law against law-abiding citizens. That is
Precisely.
harder for me to grasp and understand because that seems more illogical. And
Because you would never do that.
well, I
'Cause
would
you're a very nice person.
I would never do that.
You're also bound by a moral code that doesn't allow you to lie for your own gain.
And I don't really see anything inherently wrong with guns except for that when they get in the hands of the bad people. So my solution would be let everybody else have guns, just don't put them in the hands of bad people. But that's a lot harder, and it also gives the potential for the good people to not have guns and the bad people to continue having guns because that's the reality of the world that we live in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We will probably revisit Second Amendment conversations again in the future.
I mean, it does. Things like this just give us a moment to reflect
Yeah.
on the rules that we do have and why we have them, and the rules that we do not have and why we do not have them. As difficult as that is, at least for me, to grasp.
Oh, and
I
I do
think
not
many-
relish the death of these 18 people. It is, of course, a tragedy. And it gives us pause.
Just think that all of these arguments in this discussion makes logical sense to me from an earthly perspective, from a perspective of wanting to protect ourselves, protect our families, protect our rights. It makes sense to me, as difficult as it is for me to say. I do agree that there shouldn't be red flag laws. There should just be more good people with guns. But my question is, as a Christian, how do we approach this differently than the world would? And do we approach it differently than the world would? The Lord oftentimes tells his people, in the Old Testament at least, that he's going to fight for them. So is that an approach that we should take as Christians? Is just to put our hands up and say the Lord will fight for us? Or is that silly and unwise? How do we look differently from the world, basically?
Sure. I think that's an entire conversation in its own right. So perhaps we won't delve to the great depths. I'd also have to do some additional research to make sure that I'm fully aware. I would say that two instances that come to mind are, first off, an interpretation of turning the other cheek. Oftentimes, turning the other cheek is interpreted as you are struck and you don't fight back, you turn the other side. In the culture of the time, coming from the impression that the first strike is a backhand, striking somebody with the back of their hand was a sign of disrespect. You don't strike an equal with the back of your hand, you strike a slave or someone lower than you. So if you turn to them the other cheek, now they have to strike you with the front of their hand. And that says, we are now on equal footing. Do you actually intend to say to me, through physical violence, what it is you are saying to me? And so this idea that Jesus isn't saying that we're to be doormats or pushovers, but you can stand in public with people who are not of the same belief as you and say, I'm worthy to stand as an equal with you. And we can have this conversation. And if it's going to come to blows, it's going to come to blows. So that's an alternative interpretation of the idea of turning the other cheek that I've heard. The other one is where Jesus very clearly calls his disciples, if you don't have a sword, go and buy one, he tells them. In these days, we don't have swords, we have guns. So if you don't have an AR-15, go and buy one.
You don't bring a sword to a gunfight.
Those would be two very, I think, simplistic examples. We should dig into those more in context of the surrounding verses because that's always the best way to read scripture is in the context. But those are two examples that I've heard used to argue for a position of being well armed.
I think that in addition to what Dylan was saying, something that obviously we are called to as well is to protect those that cannot defend themselves. But how are we going to protect those who cannot defend themselves if we ourselves can't defend ourselves? Then we just become the defenseless as well. Those that cannot defend themselves in the biblical context are going to be those that the church is called to take care of.
Yeah, and going off of that, the Lord says that there is no greater love than to sacrifice your life for your friends. And so in some ways, if you're going to be the person, the good guy, shooting against the bad guy, you are putting your life on the line. You're not hiding, you're standing up and you're shooting somebody. And so you're not only putting your life on the line and the potential that you could get shot, but also you could probably go to jail you could claim self-defense, but you're going to have to go through a heck of a lot of legal stuff after the fact. And so you are putting a lot of your life on hold or even on the line to defend the innocent lives of others. Mm-hmm. So in some ways, it is a Christ-like thing to be prepared for that.
Well, thank you both for this excellent discussion. I think it's an interesting juxtaposition of the weight of tragedy and an unwavering sense of purpose of we want to be not defenseless and we want to protect those who are. Mm-hmm. And what does that translate to in terms of our personal decisions, as well as the sorts of nationwide policies and causes that we support? Thank you so much, Embers, for joining us on this week's podcast. We've had an excellent time engaging with you, the listener, but also with you, the three of us around this table, which has been, I think, enlightening for me and hopefully enlightening for you as the listener. We enjoy these topics. I think we're very passionate about them, and we hope to bring a little bit of light and truth into that. But we aren't the final say. We aren't the experts, and this is, of course, the Ember Exchange.
We'd also love if you would engage with us through a review on our podcast. You can like and subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. If you don't want to leave a 5-star review, we will also accept it because we are all about the truth here. So you can find us on any of the platforms at Ember Exchange.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Jill and Dylan said. Follow us on Spotify, like and subscribe our YouTube, and we're always interested to hear your feedback. With that, we just want you to burn bright, Embers.